So I want to make this video to talk about which Pokemon are good to power up and use in raids. Raids are a great way to get good Pokemon that you can use in other parts of the game. I've enjoyed doing a lot of solos and duos or micro teams, and I think especially with what's going on right now, sometimes it can be hard to build up a full group of players to take down a raid. So having good Pokemon in your decks is going to help a lot with taking down those raids. And you'd really want to have the most powerful Pokemon you can have. The most important thing to bring is the right typing. When we're talking about what takes down a specific raid boss, you definitely want to have the right type. So this video is going to be organized by type and talking about which types are the best. Now, I like to have Pokemon powered up ahead of time, but you don't really have to worry about that right now if you don't have that all the way. What you should be worried about is what the boss is right now or what Pokemon you're looking to take down in raids, and then focus on that one's counters. And then over time, as bosses rotate, you'll start to build up teams of different types just based on that. So you can skip ahead to the point in the video where I talk about each of the different types and then look at what you have to work for that type. So I don't tend to like to just power up 6 of the same Pokemon, and there's a few reasons for that. One, things change in the game. There could be a stat rebalance, they could add a new move, they could introduce a new Pokemon, and a lot of things will change based on that. So I like to have a lot of diversity. And it's also true, well, I mean, you'll see examples further on where I'll talk about that a little bit more. Another thing that you want to consider is secondary typing. So that will really play out a lot. Something might be the best against a Pokemon as a raid boss, but then depending on what charge move it has, it could get hit really hard or less so depending on that secondary typing. So that would change dramatically. You know, one raid to the next raid would change dramatically sometimes based on just what moves it has. So again, you want diversity more, I think, than having the absolute best team, because if you have the best team, it's not always going to pan out in the long run. It'd be the best team against one raid boss, and then it might be the worst team against the next raid or the next raid boss. So getting right into it, I think the most important typing in the game to have powered up is the fighting type. And this is because it's super effective against 5 types: ice, normal, dark, steel, and rock. And in particular, that normal typing, it's the only thing that's super effective against that. So it's the one time where I think that having a lot ahead is really good. Right now, the best you can have is right here, Lucario. And then the second best, a lot of people will know already, is Conkeldurr here. Now the trick with those two, though, is they're not the easiest to get candy for. In that case, what was long time the best was definitely Machamp here. And I think a lot of people do have full teams of Machamp, and they're not too worried about having Conkeldurr or Lucario just because Machamp's already that good. It also benefits from a few things. You can go out during cloudy weather and catch it at a high level. You can catch a lot of them without spending raid passes or hatching eggs or just hoping for luck. You can get good ones without using a lucky trade. So it's a lot easier to build up a good team of Machamps than it is with Lucario or Conkeldurr. And so far I only have one of each of those best ones and then a full team of Machamps. Now I'm also going to do a nod here to Hariyama. Hariyama is sort of a budget Machamp. The real benefit of that, it is weaker than Machamp, but the real benefit is that it doesn't use any Machamp candy to evolve and power up. And it also can be found easily in the wild at high level. So really, for just 25 candy, you can find one, even if it doesn't even have the right doesn't have good IVs, he doesn't have the right moves, if you catch like a level 33 or a level 35, just evolve it and use it on your team until you get something that you actually do want to invest in. And that can be really huge, finding things that you can use until you find something that's really amazing. I'll make a point. The thing that you should power up is probably your best example of a Pokemon. So like if I have a Kinkilder, or I have a Lucario, and I have a Machamp, and all of those have bad IVs, there's no reason. You can evolve them, but there's no reason to power them up or waste a lot of resources on it. You'd want to power up the thing that you have a good one of, because in the long run of the game, if you'll be playing for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to find a good IV one of the other ones. So you might as well sit on your Lucario candy, or your, right here, Kinkilder's candy, just so that you can, Timber candy, just so that you can save it for that really good one that you come across, especially since they're so rare. So I am going to name a few more Pokemon that I think are good. In particular, Breloom has a really high DPS. It's really only worth using when that grass type acts as an extra benefit to it, if it gives some extra resistance, because it's such a glass cannon. And I would also do a big nod to Blaziken here. The big benefit of Blaziken, obviously it was a Community Day Pokemon, but it's more powerful as the Fire type. But if you have one with Fire type, you can just, for 10,000 Stardust, you can add that second move and use it from the Fire typing and the Fighting typing, and on top of that, that Fire typing can act as extra resistance. The one downside is that its Fighting type charge move isn't that good. It only has close combat, or Focus Blast, apparently. Focus Blast is what I'm looking for, which isn't nearly as good as Dynamic Punch or Aura Sphere that are on the other ones. But I do think it could hold its own if that's what you're looking at. It's definitely worth mentioning. And I also want to throw out Toxicroak here, who happens to max out under 2,500. So if you're a PvP player, this one can it can fill a gap on your team. It works from the Poison type and the Fighting type, but it can fill a gap on your team while also working as a PvP Pokemon, and that's pretty huge. Obviously, a lot of these other ones, certainly you see Hariyama, Kinkilder, Machamp, and Lucario in PvP as well, so those can also work doubly. So what I think is the second best is, and I don't like this new search function they have where it doesn't erase what you had, but dark typing. So clearly the best dark type is Darkrai up there. I have 2 of them maxed out so far, but it is pretty limiting on how you can get it. I mean, it's had some pretty small raid times, so it's hard to get out there and grind a lot of candy, find a really good one, and it can't be traded, so you just have what you have. Whatever you happen to get, that's what you have. It can't be lucky. It's going to cost a lot to power up. So while it's the best, I wouldn't really recommend, powering up 6 of them. The second best is definitely Weavile. I have 3 of these ones maxed out. I really like that it works from the Ice type and the Dark type. So adding that second move for just 50,000 is well worth it. And then it can cover 2 different typings at the same time. So it is the second best at 2 typings right now, which is pretty big. Now, a lot of people will say that it's pretty glassy, but I don't think so. There's a lot more glassy Pokemon out there. I think the downside of that one is that it has all the potential weaknesses from Dark and all the potential weaknesses from Ice. So you have to watch out for what moves the boss you're going up against has, because it will definitely, if it gets hit by something that's super effective against it, it's going to get hit pretty hard. Now, a lot of people always swear by Tyranitar, and I do have one maxed out here, which I use as my tank option. I like to have 1 tank on each of my teams, but Tyranitar it was the best Dark type forever, so a lot of people have a lot of them, but it's really not. It's pretty overrated, really. I wouldn't want more than 2 on a team just because it's so tanky. It's good to make sure that you're not fading out, but it's certainly not something you'd want a whole team of. On the other options here, I do have a maxed out Absol. Absol is extremely glassy, and the fact that it's weaker than Weavile and harder to get candy for than Weavile, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if you like it, it's a lot of fun, it works, but I wouldn't recommend it at all. And then Honchkrow is also a bit on the glassy side, although it has the benefit of working from a dark type and a flying type, which is really huge to be able to cover 2 types. So I think that one's a much better option. And I tend to see the last one I'll mention here is Houndoom. Houndoom, I wouldn't think, it's really not that good. It's definitely inferior to all the other ones, but some people live in areas where these are all over the place and you can catch it at level 35. In that case, why not evolve it and use it in a raid? So, the other thing I'm going to mention is ghost typing. Man, I hate this search function right now. Ghost typing overlaps dark typing a lot, and why those 2 types are so good is because there's so many legendaries of the psychic typing. The one thing about ghost typing where I would rank it below dark typing in usefulness is just that they're harder to get. There was really just 3 that are worth mentioning. Giratina Origin Form is both one of the hardest hitting and one of the tankiest, so definitely amazing. And then there's Chandelure here, which is also very, very solid. And then Gengar, which Gengar has always been one of my favorite Pokemon, but it is very, very glassy. So I don't think I would even recommend that. But unless you have a good version, a good example of one of these ghosts, I don't think they're necessarily, it's not necessarily worth worrying about. There's dark types will definitely pull it, and they're a lot easier to find. So after that, I'm going to give a big shout out to Dragon type. So one of the strengths of Dragon type is they show up a lot at the legendary level. So definitely if you're doing those legendary 5-star raids, you'll see a lot of Dragon types. And then what's good against that is Dragon type. So I like to have a lot of diversity in my Dragon types. The best is definitely Rayquaza here. Rayquaza is 3rd best, I think, or 4th best at this point of flying type, but it's the best of all the Dragon types. And of course, Dragonite is sort of a budget option of that, but it ranks much, much lower in terms of all the dragons, and I think definitely Salamence, although you do need the Community Day move for Salamence, it's better than Dragonite, and then inferior to Rayquaza. But the interesting thing about those is that they all have the exact same typing. So if you have Rayquaza, why not just use Rayquaza? There's definitely benefits, though, of going with the other dragons because their secondary typing can sometimes put them ahead, or more often, Rayquaza's secondary typing can give it a weakness that would make it fall out and not necessarily be as useful. The second best dragon, in my opinion, is Palkia. So Palkia has a lot of resistances, and it's just a big, mean Pokemon. A lot of people will give a lot of nods to Dialga. Dialga is the tank among the dragons and ranks usually one of the lowers in terms of actually doing damage in a raid. Although it has that benefit that I mentioned before where you can use it in PvP. It's an amazing PvP Pokemon. So if you power one up, you can use it in raids and then have a really solid PvP Pokemon. I don't think that Latios gets enough credit. That 3-bar charge move becomes real useful. And that psychic typing, once in a while, when that psychic typing is an advantage, I've seen this one be on the top of the list for dragon types against the right Pokemon. If it just happens to be, if it has a charge move that's weak to psychic, then this guy's not going to mind it at all, and it's going to suddenly pull up ahead of the other ones. Usually it does rank lower than the other dragons, though, so I can see why people would prefer to sink Rare Candy into something like a Rayquaza instead. And definitely my boy here, Garchomp, who has that ground typing that'll help him out. And you'll notice that I don't have a lot of the other dragons, but what typing they have is what's going to make that difference. And I think that Niantic's done a good job of making all the dragons similar in power, and then it's that secondary typing that'll decide what is better or worse. So what I consider to be the fourth best, though, the search function, is rock type. So rock type has the benefits. The big benefit of rock type is that it's good against flying type, and a lot of Pokemon have flying type as a secondary typing. So in all those cases, you can exploit their secondary typing to use a rock type, and that's why I think it's good to have a rock type team. The best in rock type at this time is why am I drawing a blank? Rampardos here. Now, some people will say that Rampardos is a bit glassy. I don't think it's all that glassy. I mean, it's definitely not a tank, but it's really not that glassy, and I've got 3 of those maxed out for my team. And then the second best is Rhyperior, although you do need the Community Day move to have it be all that good at rock type. I would give a big nod to Rhyperior, though, and that it's pretty easy to find out in the wild, weather boosted, sunny weather and partly cloudy weather. See them all the time, catch them high level with high IVs, and it is actually pretty good with the non-Community Day move. It's definitely superior with the Community Day move, but in my case, I have 4 of those maxed out, and one of them that originally had the Stone Edge instead of Rock Wrecker, I just TM'd it over to ground, so that now I have 2 maxed out for ground and 2 maxed out for rock, and that works pretty well. Now, Tyranitar again gets a lot of love. People always talk about how good it is, but it's tanky. It was slightly better than Rhyperior when Rhyperior has the Stone Edge as its charge move, but considering the cost difference, I mean, I really don't see all that many high-level Larvitars out in the wild. So Rhyperior, even before the Community Day move, I preferred Rhyperior just because it didn't cost as much to get it at that high level. And I think the real budget option here is, of course, Golem. For a long time, Golem was the best. And certainly if you get a high-level Golem and evolve it, either Alolan or Kanto Golem, it can be a good rock type just to hold down your team until you get some of the better ones. I wouldn't necessarily sink Stardust into it. Save your Stardust for something that's really great. I probably would only recommend sinking Stardust into a Tyranitar if you were doing the Dark move side, even though the Rock moves are exclusive from a Community Day. I think it falls too far behind the other Rock types to be worth that level of investment. So next I'm going to do a nod to Water typing. I think that's the 5th most useful. And one of the big things here is that it is boosted in rainy weather. So even sometimes where it's not necessarily super effective, these can be really useful if it just happens to be raining out. Where you have fighting type for cloudy and you have rock type for partly cloudy. You know, when it's raining out, you just throw some waters in there. So the king of water obviously is Kyogre. It's legendary, but it's so far and above everything else that it's worth every cent of that rare candy and Stardust. It'll be interesting to see how much better it gets with an exclusive move, but it's already really amazing, and I think it'll probably be like Mewtwo, in that they probably won't make the exclusive move that much better, just because that would be way, way OP. And the other water typings, well, the second best in terms of DPS is Kingler, which I don't have on here because it's a glass cannon, and although I do tend to favor glass cannons, I think that if glass cannon isn't the best option, then it usually falls pretty far down because it's lasting less time and not doing the most damage. That's a pretty big jump. So I personally think that Gyarados here is your second best option. And a lot of people will get hung up on the fact that it takes so much candy to evolve, but I actually think that sometimes it actually saves candy to evolve because it's not hard to find a weather-boosted Magikarp. So if you're evolving it, even if you're spending 400 to evolve it, you could still be spending less in candy than some of these other options because you don't have to power it up as far. And you're saving Stardust, which is a more limiting resource anyway. So this one is definitely a good water type in that flying subtyping can work both as a benefit or as a weakness. Definitely the next best is Hydro Cannon on a Swampert. That's another good one for PvP as well. So that's one that you could power up and use for both. In fact, all of these water types work good for PvP. And the one downside of this is that is an exclusive Community Day move. But it also works if you have that move, then you can add a second move and use it for ground type raids as well, which we'll cover in just a minute. Now, I definitely like Feraligatr. It's weaker than the Swampert, and it doesn't really add a second typing, but it definitely works if you like it. And then the final one I'm going to mention is actually Vaporeon. Now, the thing about Vaporeon is it's not that good. It's a bit tanky. It doesn't do that much damage, but boy, is it easy to get. So I think I wouldn't necessarily power one of these up, but you can easily get an Eevee at level 35 and evolve it and just put it on your team to hold things down until you get something better. And that's a rule that I'm going to put out there, and we'll discuss it as we go on to the different types, is basically if there's an evolution that's available, it's good enough, and if there isn't, if you ever come across a Pokemon that isn't better than the evolution, then there's no reason to ever invest in it for raids, because EVs are so cheap and easy to get that the evolution should always be your last option for your team. Anything worse than that is not gonna be worth it at all. And so I am gonna go ahead and move on to ground typing. So ground typing has the benefit of being boosted, I should spell it right, in sunny weather. That's pretty huge. Now, Groudon was the best for a long time, so I've got 2 of those maxed out, but it's sort of fallen behind a few things, and it probably won't step back up until it gets its exclusive move. I'm definitely a big fan of Excadrill, which is the highest DPS ground type. A little bit on the last year side. I have 3 of those maxed out, and they really do the trick. That steel typing can give it some extra resistances as well. And then, of course, Rhyperior, which is more of a tank option. It's easy to get at high level, easy to get candy for. So I'm always going to be pushing Rhyperiors. And I know it definitely could, if you had a good enough one, give it a second move and use it from that rock and ground type. But I feel like I find enough of those in the wild at a high level that in that case, just evolving multiples and having them for different typings works better for me. Mamoswine's pretty decent. Again, it can be used as from the ice perspective and the ground perspective. I haven't ever needed to use it from the ground perspective because there's so many other options, but it's definitely passable. And if you have one, you can save your investment by giving it a second move. And certainly, Garchomp. I like it better from the ground typing than the dragon typing, but it's particularly good against electric type Pokemon just because the dragon typing gives it resistances and the ground typing gives it resistance. So even if it's not the highest DPS, sometimes that lasting longer will make all the difference. I definitely like Swampert as a ground type. If you might have one because of the Community Day move or because of PvP, it's certainly passable. Probably falls more into the evolution level. And then, of course, Kanto Golem. It's definitely passable. I wouldn't invest any dust in it, but if you have a high-level one, it can do the job until you come up with something better. So I tend to see Kanto Golem as being the evolution level ground type as well as the evolution level rock type Pokemon. Although, considering how easy it is to get Rhyperiors, it might not even make any sense. I'm going to now give a shout out to a Pokemon typing that I don't think gets enough love, grass typing. For the longest time, there weren't very many good grass typing, so I think people have gotten into this idea of grass type just not being that good, but that has changed a lot. In particular, it's good against ground type when it's sunny out, because you want to raid ground types when it's sunny out to catch a higher level one that's weather boosted, but grass typing also gets that weather boost under the same typing, so it's the perfect thing to use against a ground type. Of these, the best is Roserod by a long shot. It's pretty great. It's not that hard to find. I do think I have a harder time getting candy for it than some of the other Pokemon I've mentioned on here. It's no Rhyperior, certainly it's no Eevee, but it's also not a legendary, so you don't have to waste rare candy on it. And it happens to be the best of two types, which doesn't happen as much anymore. So it is the best of grass type and the best of poison type. And while poison type isn't that useful to have, I mean, once in a while it comes up, and the fact that Roserod works for two, I have two of these at the moment, and then I can just fast TM over to make it double grass or double poison. And I really want to have a third one. I've been trying to get a good trade on a shiny one so that I can have some diversity there, but Roserod really is that good. The second best is Tangrowth here. It is the tank among the grass types, so the fact that it's the second highest DPS is saying quite a lot. To be both the tank option and pretty high DPS, I'm a pretty big fan of that. Now there's two good grass type starters. Certainly Venusaur gets a lot of attention. It's a bit on the tankier side now, so even though Frenzy Plant hits so hard, I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you also plan to use it in PvP, which is also very good in. So that could be a good excuse to be using a Frenzy Plant Venusaur in raids as well. I mean, it gets the job done, but I think it started to fall behind due to being a tank that doesn't get as much DPS as some of the other ones. I'm a much bigger fan of Sceptile. I actually powered it up before the community day, so I have one maxed out with Leaf Blade, which is very good. I actually like it better than Frenzy Plant Venusaur. It has the higher DPS, and but it's glassier. But it worked better overall, and they worked particularly well as a team to have some glass and some tank as well. But once they gave it Frenzy Plant, boy, it really pulled ahead. Obviously, it's still weaker than Roserod or Tangrowth. But then, hey, here's that evolution. Leafeon is a beast. Has a 3-bar charge move. It's not the best, but boy, is it cheap and easy to get at a high level due to being an evolution. So the only other thing I'll mention is Breloom. It is a glass cannon, and I think it's only worthwhile as a grass type to even consider if you have the exclusive move. And which was, I think, not that many people have them, but it does fall. Here's Grass Knot. So Grass Knot's the exclusive move that was only a few days you could evolve into that, and we'll see when they eventually allow us to get that again. But I think being that it's such a glass cannon, I would only recommend powering this up as a grass type if you have that move, and you can, if you want to use it as a fighting type as well, which it's a bit better as a fighting type. So the next thing I will mention is electric type. So electric type has the benefit, like rock type, of hitting flying types. But I think where it really shines is in being a counter for water types, for the same reason that I was talking about grass types there, in that it's weather boosted when water type is weather boosted. So if I'm going after Kyogre raids, I'll want to do it when it's raining out so that I can get a weather boosted Kyogre, and in that case the best thing to have is electric types. The cool thing about electric types is there's actually two Pokemon that are pretty evenly matched and are both considered the best. There's Raikou. So Raikou is a legendary. It's hard to get. It takes rare candy to power up, and the best you can hope to get is a level 25. So that's pretty tough to work with, but it is tankier of the two best electric types, so I definitely like having it. I have 2 maxed out and a third one powered up, so I'm definitely a big fan of that. And then there's Electivire, and I'd probably give the nod of best electric type to Electivire. It's a bit glassier, but it ends up evening out with Raikou. They tend to end up doing about the same amount of damage in a raid, but it's so much easier to get a high level one since they can spawn out in the wild. You can get lucky, get a good one from an egg, that's level 20, and you'd have to power it up. So that would be full cost, but you definitely have that rare candy from catching Electabuzzes in the wild, or you could get a good Electabuzz and just evolve into Electivire and be most of the way there, especially if it was caught out weather boosted as high as level 35. I'm going to name check Magnezone. That steel typing gives it a little more resistance, but it tends to be the tank option anyway, so I like to have one of these maxed out for my team, put at the end and prevent from fainting out. And then, of course, Zapdos, which is the third best electric type in terms of DPS. But that the flying subtyping can work as a benefit or a weakness. So once in a rare while, that flying typing might make it come out ahead of the other electric types. But more often than not, it'll be a weakness and make it so that you don't want to use Zapdos. So I only have 1 maxed out, although 2 powered up for when it does become useful. And then the last one I'll mention is Jolteon. So Jolteon's the evolution, and it's easy to get at high level. Now, Luxray's pretty great, but considering how hard it is to get the candy and how hard it is to get a high level one, it's just slightly better than Jolteon. But how much easier it is to get a good Jolteon, I just can't see recommending somebody actually powering one of those up. So the next thing I will mention is psychic typing. So psychic typing manages to finish the triumvirate with dark typing and fighting typing. So it's good to have dark typing to take down psychics. So to get your dark typings, it's useful to have fighting type, because those can take down the dark types. So now you can go hunt dark types using your fighting typing. But what do you need to take down those fighting type raids is psychic type. So not surprising to anybody, I'm sure, the best psychic type is Mewtwo. So Mewtwo has an exclusive move of Psystrike, and that's the best possible thing you can get from the psychic typing. Psychic, as its secondary move, is not too bad. It's only slightly worse than Psystrike, so if you have it, you can certainly use it. It works fine. And the Mewtwo will beat down a Machamp raid pretty easily. The second best psychic typing at this time is actually Latios. Doesn't get enough respect, but on the downside, if you're going to be burning rare candies, why not be burning those on a Mewtwo? So I think if you are going to fill out your team with something else, you'd be better off with something that's non-psychic. Metagross is a bit of a tank option. It's much, much better from the steel typing, but certainly if you have a Meteor Mesh Metagross, you could add a second move, give it psychic, and then use it for 2 different raid types. But I'd be a little bit wary of TMing it too much, because you definitely don't want to accidentally TM away that Meteor Mesh. It's so good. So the ones that I will check down here are definitely Espeon, which is the evolution. It is an absolute beast as a psychic type. It doesn't hold any candles at all to Mewtwo, but considering how much easier and cheaper you can get it, it is an amazing choice. And then Alakazam, which I've always been a fan of. I don't have Alakazam with Psychic, which is the best possible move because it's currently Legacy. But I wouldn't be too surprised if they fix that, since it's so far down the Psychic type list. Next, I will mention ice typing. So I think ice typing is one of those that isn't that useful most of the time, but in those rare instances where it is, it'll be incredibly useful. And the best time to use ice typing is when a Pokemon is double weak to ice typing, like if it's ground and flying like our current raid boss, or if it's dragon and flying like a lot of the dragons are, then ice typing will be really useful to have. Although Mamoswine, which is the best ice type, is so good that you can use it in a lot of situations when you might not necessarily want to even go with the ice typing, just because it's that powerful. And the other two solid ice types are Weavile, which I discussed before, that does double duty as one of the best dark types and one of the best ice types, and Glaceon, which is very, very cheap to power up or just evolve and have a good ice type. So those three are the only ice types that matter at this time. After that, I'm going to mention fire typing. And now fire typing is another one where it's really not that useful, except in the rare instances when it is. So it's a little bit further down the list of importance. The best fire typing, which I don't actually have, I'll pull it up real quick for you, is Darmanitan. So I have been trying to trade for a good Darmanitan, but I am waiting to get a good trade on one. I definitely have a lot of Darumaka candy from hatching. So once I get one, I'm definitely going to have it up there. So I'm looking forward to having one of those, but at the same time, I do have so many good fire types that it's really not that big of an issue, other than I like to have at least one of everything and try it out. I actually will give a big nod to Moltres. I think it's one of the best legendaries to power up. Even though it uses rare candy to do so, it's one of the best legendaries to add a second move to. It's the best from the flying type perspective. It's the second best from the fire type perspective, but the big thing there is there's two typings that fire and flying are both really good against, and that's bug and grass. And so now you have a situation where this Pokemon is doubly resistant to the moves that you would see on bug types and on grass types. So it's going to pull ahead, even though it's not on paper the best fire type. It's going to be very resistant to those. And I think that's one of the reasons why it really stands out a lot. Now, Blastburn Charizard, it's sort of fallen down in the fire types a lot, and I think a big thing there is that it's sort of the budget Moltres. It doesn't use rare candy to do, but it's also a pretty significant hit in being not quite as good. Like, you're taking a pretty big dive once you step down to that. The third best fire type is definitely Chandelure, and I think what's good about this one, even though it is a little hard to get the candy for, I cleaned up pretty well at Halloween time with Litwix being around, but it's a little hard to get, but it is one of the best ghost types and one of the best fire types, so you can definitely add that second move and have a really good Pokemon from both types. And then we're going to talk about Flareon. So, Flareon, to me, is the fourth best fire type, and it doesn't get enough of a nod. And I noticed a lot of times if you're going to Pokebattler and you're looking at what's best against a boss that's weak to fire, you'll see that Flareon, Charizard with Blast Burn, and Entei all fall out pretty much in the same spot. Like, they're all just a few seconds away from each other, but the big difference there is that Flareon is cheap and easy to get, and those other two are exclusive. Entei takes rare candies. Now, it's a tank, so it lasts longer, but it does less damage while it's in there. So, and then Charizard, of course, has that exclusive move that in order for it to even be worth using, you have to have that Community Day move. So the fact that they both rank very closely with Flareon means, to me, you should just be running Flareons. Blaziken with the Community Day move steps up a lot. It's pretty glassy, but it's pretty great. It's actually better than Flareon. So I guess I was counting that wrong. So definitely Darmanitan, then Moltres, then Chandelure, then Blaziken with the exclusive move, and then Flareon. And everything else you really don't need to bother with because it's either comparable or not as good as Flareon. So these last ones I'm going to go to are the ones that are very situational, and I don't think you need them at all. I do want to mention what's the best of each typing. I'm going to mention steel typing. So I don't necessarily recommend people having a steel type team. It's not that useful. It doesn't come up that often. And when it comes to steel type, there's just one thing to have, and that is Metagross. But to have a truly good Metagross, it needs to have Meteor Mash, which is an exclusive Community Day move. So, if you're talking steel typing, you either have a team of Meteor Mash Metagross, or you don't. And then you just don't have any steel typings. And the second best steel type is Flash Cannon Metagross. And a lot of people don't recognize that. Flash Cannon is pretty terrible, but still, as steel types go, Metagross is still the best. He's the best and he's the second best. But if you do have a good Metagross, I would recommend saving it until you can get that Meteor Mash so everything else doesn't really matter. Alright, so let's go to bug typing. So you see Scissor here. Now it has that steel typing, and some people will say that you can use it from the steel typing, but boy is it classy and doesn't do much damage to the steel typing. I do like it as a bug type. Bug type has a benefit of being good against psychic type and good against dark type in some situations where the types that you would use more often in those raids will get hard hit by a charge move, like if it has a fighting charge move, or even if it has a fighting fast move, that might be destroying a dark type that you would want to use against a psychic, and then the bug type wouldn't mind it at all. The best bug type right now is Pinsir, followed by Scissor, and then Yanmega is sort of the tankier option, but they're all three very comparable in damage. The one thing I wouldn't recommend powering up a bug type right now, because they're about to drop two better ones. They did already give us... what am I thinking of? Oh boy. I just drew a blank. Alright, they already gave us one of them with the legendary, mythical... What am I thinking of? Alright, I'll pull up the other list. Okay, so... Alright, they're about to give us Volcarona. Volcarona will be a very good fire type and the best possible bug type. So that's the number one reason why I think powering up a bug type isn't worth it. But they did just give us Genesect. So Genesect is the second best bug type after Volcarona. And they did give it to us as a level 15 exclusive mythical Pokemon. And that's not really worth powering up because it's so low level. But once they put Genesect into EX raids, you'll be able to do it potentially in the rain and get a weather boosted one, or at least get one at level 20 and then power it up. And it'd be a much better bug type than the three that I have maxed out right now. So, holding out for Volcarona, which I think will be pretty rare, or Genesect, which is mythical, would probably be better than any of these. But certainly if you happen to catch a high-level Pinsir or Scissor or Yanma in the wild, they're good. I have one maxed out for each, and they definitely do the trick. They can allow me to... solo a what am I thinking of now? Alright, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Too much thinking. Alright. They allow me to solo a Shiftry 4-star raid when it's raining out. So that was pretty cool. To be able to actually solo a 4-star raid. So the next thing I'll mention is Fairy type. So I think Fairy types can be pretty useful. they're definitely useful in PvP. So that's another place where you could power one up and use it in PvP and then potentially use it in a raid. But where they really stand out is against fighting types because they're weather boosted in cloudy weather, and fighting types are also weather boosted in cloudy weather. And as fairy types go, Gardevoir is leagues above everything else. And its moves are not exclusive, so that's pretty good to have. Clefable is this isn't Clefable. Clefable is a bit of a glass cannon, probably not worth it in the raid perspective, and Granbull also probably not worth it, although both of those could potentially work for PvP and then be used across. But really, Togekiss is the only other fairy type worth having in raids. So definitely Gardevoir and Togekiss. Togekiss being the tankier option, and Gardevoir being the one you'd want more of. So those are pretty decent. Pretty decent. Flying type is the next one I'm going to mention. Now, a lot of things have flying type as a typing, but then don't have the moves. So Pokemon actually having 2 flying type moves is pretty rare. As it goes, the best one to have is Moltres, although that Sky Attack is an exclusive move from a specific time when you could do raids and get the Sky Attack move. So you could trade for it, or you can hope it comes back, or potentially that Elite TM might allow you to get it. But it's the best flying type right now. And second best is actually Honchkrow, although it's a bit of a glass cannon. And then third best is the Rayquaza. But the benefit of all of those is that you'd potentially be powering them up for other purposes, so that's just an extra excuse to run them. I think Unpheasant and maybe this one, which is what? Staraptor. Like, those are good flying types that are only flying types. So if you happen to catch one of those out in the wild, it could definitely help you take down some raids against bug type, against grass type, against fighting type, where flying type is significant. But I don't know if I would necessarily invest Stardust in it. Just look for a good one and evolve it. Next, just about the bottom of the list, is poison typing. So as I mentioned before, the best poison typing is Roserod, and you should already have it powered up for grass typing, so it can cover that. The only time I've ever used poison typing as a raid is against fairies in cloudy weather, when fairy is weather boosted, because poison type is also weather boosted. And the second best is actually Toxicroak. So even though it's so far down the list, something like a lowland muck or regular muck are tank options. They don't do that much DPS, but they can definitely keep you in there. But they usually fall behind anything else. Gengar and Venusaur are on the list, but they don't have double poison moves. They both only have poison charge moves, so it's not really good from the poison typing, at least in terms of doing raids. So the last typing is normal typing. And from a raid perspective, normal typing is completely worthless. It's not super effective against anything, and there's no reason to use it. It'd be a different story if you're talking about defending gyms, or if you're talking about PvP, they can be useful, but not from a raid perspective. There is no normal type that's worth it from a raid perspective. And that is my whole list.